Talks and Happy Hour. This is the first one of these kinds of events we've done for several years. We want to thank you for coming. It's been a period of pause from these kind of events because of the pandemic, but it's really great to get everybody back together. We were really surprised at the size of the response because we decided to do this late, and so it's heartwarming to see so many old friends sign up to come to this event, and we're really looking forward to the events of the day. We're starting a little bit late, so I'm going to move through my part of the presentation quickly, and we'll get on to the remaining sessions. The first thing I want to do is thank our sponsors. We have three sponsors for this event. The event is co-sponsored by TCG Player, and I'm going to allow them a couple of minutes to introduce themselves to you. It's also sponsored by Kickstarter, and I want to thank them because we were thinking about doing this 5 or 6 weeks ago. They stood up and said, yes, we would like to support this, and we're really glad that they did because it's turning out to be a very well-attended event. And then I also want to thank our contributing sponsor, Diamond Comic Distributors. They've been a long-term sponsor of these kinds of events and a long-term supporter of events that benefit the industry and of this event in particular. So at this point I'd like to introduce Chetty Hampson. He's the CEO of TCG Player, and we're just going to introduce him and his company to you at this event.
Hello, everybody. So I'm the CEO of TCG Player. My name is Chetty Hampson. TCG Player is it's a company focused on trading card games. So what we have been trying to do for the last 20 years is solve the problems of buying and selling trading cards focused on the physical world, the brick and mortar stores in this country, as well as the digital and online marketplace, and kind of bringing those two together. Our experience is that Syracuse area. So what we saw from the local gaming stores level was customers buying entire collections, runs of comic books. They come in, they want to buy all their Pokemon cards. They want to put together these large collections. It's something they really can't do online. There's a lot of online marketplaces that are out there, and they're really focused on how you complete a collection, but not how you put all of those products together. And so TCG Player really has just been building tools and services for all the brick and mortar stores in the country, putting together price guides that allow customers across the country to buy, trade with their friends, really understand the value of these products. And I'm excited for this Comic-Con because this month we are moving into the world of comic books. So at the end of this month, you'll be able to buy and sell Marvel and DC comic books, entire collections and runs of those books, an online price guide that isn't just focused on the $5,000, the $1,000 items, but the $1, the $3 items, the movers and shakers, thinks about stocks when you're thinking about comic books. So that will launch at the end of this month, and then we're following it up in the coming year with sports cards and video games as well. So really think about everything a brick and mortar store would carry. How do you price, how do you buy and sell those, and then how do you list those online. So really excited to sponsor this event, and looking forward to your presentation, Milton.
Thank you, Chetty. Talk about today are first give you a little background on the comics and graphic novel market. Some of this information we released earlier this year, some of it we didn't. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the evolution of comic supply chains from 1970 to the present. I'm going to talk about the state of the supply chains for comics and graphic novels today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how sales are going in 2022, and then we're going to finish up with an exciting announcement. First, talk a little bit about how we build our models. NPD Bookscan is kind enough to share with us their point-of-sale data from the tens of thousands of retailers that they collect data from, both brick and mortar and online. We eliminate duplication because they do collect some information from comic stores. We account for the retailers that they don't account for, and also include an estimate for Canada. We also get information from Scholastic Book Fairs, which is a very important retailer of kids' graphic novels, and we also develop estimates for crowdfunding and newsstand. We use Comic Hub's POS data and previous data that has been released by Diamond Comic Distributors to build up our estimates of the comic store model. And the big thing in 2021 is that there was a massive growth in the comics and graphic novel business, passing $2 billion to about $2.1 billion. That was a 62% growth rate from the previous year. Yeah, we can applaud for that. That was pretty great. And there were a lot of COVID-related changes that provided big stimulus to the business, not only in the sense of government stimulus, but also in the sense of people that had more time, spent more time at home, and found that they enjoyed the hobbies that they could do at home rather than going out to eat or interacting in person. Big part of that was that the book channel boomed. That was up 81%, and it has doubled since 2019. That's the graphic novel business. Comic store channel was up about a third, 34% since 2019. So both channels are growing. The book channel is just growing faster. The book channel is now about two-thirds larger than the comic store channel. The graphic novel format was up about 76%. Comics, the periodical format, is up about 23% since 2019. So again, everything's growing. They're just growing at different paces, and graphic novels are growing the fastest. Graphic novels are now about 3/4 of the business. Manga was the source of a lot of that growth in the graphic novel business. It grew, by our estimate, about 134% in 2021, which is a crazy number. Of the 4 categories we track, which are manga, kids, superhero, which is sort of a umbrella category for anything that's a corporate-owned property, and author, which is creator-owned properties. Of those, manga was up the highest, superheroes grew the slowest, but it was still up about 25%, so there was still growth there, just not at that same crazy rate. Important to note that manga and kids graphic novels together are now about 70% of the graphic novel business, which makes them sort of the drivers of what's happening in the total numbers. Manga sales, as I said, exploded in 2021. Our estimate is that the total manga market in North America was $550 million. So crossed $500 million last year. That's about 2.5 times as high as it hit in its peak in the late aughts. And the only real constraint on sales was not demand, but supply chain problems. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now I'm going to kind of go through the evolution of supply chains for comics and graphic novels over the last, since 1970. In 1970, the distribution system basically started with a creator. They did work for a publisher. The publisher sold comics to a national distributor. They sold it to a local wholesaler. They sold it to a mom and pop, mostly retailer, newsstands and drugstores, those kind of outlets. And to the extent there was a community, it was built around the reader. Then in 1973, the Comics Direct Market came about. This was a shorter supply chain. And the biggest change there was that the community started to form around the comic store. And it's been very powerful force driving comic sales for the last 5 decades. In 2021, we had a new change to the Comics Direct Market, which was that a book distributor entered the field and started distributing comics to the wholesale trade in the direct market. So now we have sort of 2 channels into the comic stores. One, traditional direct market distributors, in which I'd include Diamond Comic Distributors and Lunar Distribution. And then Marvel is distributed by Penguin Random House, and they've also added IDW, and next year we'll add Dark Horse. The community did not change, however. That community is still built around the comic store. Graphic novels started to boom in the 1990s. Here, the creators did not go necessarily through a comic book publisher. They went straight to a book publisher who sold to a book distributor and sold to bookstores and other retailers that carried books. Then in the 2000s, we started to see the growth of online retailers in that channel, which now account, Amazon, I think most people believe accounts for about half of all book sales. That includes their digital business. And also a much shorter supply chain where the creator basically put their comics online and reach the reader that way, also started out in the aughts on webcomics platforms. And those communities for that type of content formed around the platforms. So the creator would interact with the reader on these web comic platforms and later Webtoon platforms. And that created a very strong bond between the creator and the readers, and a very powerful bond. That allowed that kind of material to be collected into book format, and that audience that was developed through online means was able to buy collections of their of the work that they had read online, and so they followed the material into these new formats. And the community, however, was still formed online, and so we sort of had two places or three places where community was forming today. We have it in comic stores, we have it forming online around these Webtoon or webcomic platforms, and then there are also still groups of readers who get together away from any of those types of platforms or environments, and get together in clubs or in people's homes and talk about comics. Crowdfunding also evolved in the 2010s, and in this situation the creator puts their work on a crowdfunding platform. The reader can interact directly with the creator or the publisher on the platform and buy the product, fund the product, back the product, and then receive it at a later point. So that takes us to the supply chains today. The direct market has had the biggest changes in the last 3 years that we've seen in the last 25 years. In 1996, I sold my company, which was called Capital City Distribution, to Diamond Comic Distributors. And at that point, Diamond Comic Distributors became pretty much the only distributor that was selling new comics and graphic novels to comic stores. And that system persisted until 2020, when first DC decided to choose another way to reach the direct market, and later Marvel with PRH. So what that means is that retailers are now dealing with more suppliers than they ever have before. And I like to use the analogy of Einsteinian space-time. Einstein says that the presence of a large body, a mass, changes the shape of space around it, and that's what the graphic novel business has done to the comics and graphic novel business. It's altered the space around it. So Book Channel is now dominating a lot of published book format products, whether they're to online bookstores, book chains, and to a growing degree to comic stores. And now book distribution is also selling periodical comics to comic stores. So it's altered the shape of the space, and the gravity, just the power of the money and volume that's flowing through the book system has dramatically changed the comics business in the last 10 years, and especially in the last few years. There's still a lot of COVID-related supply chain disruptions. We've got periodical schedules slipping, especially Marvel. Reprints are very difficult. You know, I had publishers telling me in the summer, oh gee, we just sold out of this new graphic novel, we're not going to get a new print run until January. So it's very difficult to satisfy demand on big successes. And manga has been the place where that's really been felt, because the demand is so high, and despite the fact that there's a lot of product being printed and shipped, there's still a lot of shortages. And it was described to me by Kevin Hamrick of Viz in an interview with me a couple of months ago. At the printer, they're short on paper. At the printer, they're short on labor. They're short of people to drive trucks. At the ports, they're short of people to unload ships. So the whole system is just really strained And those are both demand and supply driven disruptions. You have all the disruption of supply that I just described, and you have this big increase in demand. The sum total of that is there's a lot of demand out there that's not being filled. And the general sense I get from publishers across the spectrum of comics and graphic novels is that there's little hope for improvement in that until sometime next year at best. Another thing I want to point out in the current state of supply chains is that more new comics are now being created for digital consumption than any other initial format. And a lot of that is user-generated content, so it's not all professional work, but there's just a lot of material being created. And that includes digital-first comics from major publishers, including Marvel, DC, Amazon, through the Comixology division. Through comics on social media, there's comics on the Webtoon and webcomic platforms, and then comics on just creator websites and blogs and Patreons. So web-first comics have become a new key source of new print material, and it's growing rapidly. So talking a little bit about this year, comic stores have generally been reporting increased sales. There's been a few big hits in periodicals. It's been sort of a quiet year, but the volumes are still up. Aftermarket sales remain very strong. They're not as hot as they were in the depths of the COVID era, and by aftermarket I'm talking about back issue sales, but still a lot stronger than they were a couple of years ago. It's still very solid. And the big news that I'm getting directly from retailers who have been observing who comes into their stores is that the new customers that came into the business and into stores during the COVID era are continuing to buy, and that's great news because they're, yes, let's applaud to that, for sure. And that includes graphic novels and kids' graphic novels and manga especially, because those are the things that are most accessible to new readers. So as these new customers came into comic stores looking for something to do while they were locked down and while their kids were locked down, they tended to first gravitate toward graphic novels, and that's one of the reasons that the growth has been so strong in graphic novels. And those customers aren't necessarily Wednesday warriors, but they're coming regularly into stores and buying new comics and graphic novel material. The book channel is still driven by manga, where sales are still increasing over 2021 this year. We have streaming shows that are based on comic properties. We have other media and webtoons that are driving the non-manga sales. And one title I just want to call out as kind of an exception is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin, which was a crossover hit across all channels. It was new material on a venerable property, and really seemed to catch on in a way that a lot of other books had not. The challenges are profound going into the holiday period. Inflation is definitely hitting disposable income. But comic stores I talk to are generally bullish despite those challenges. People want to escape into comics when the world around them isn't necessarily something they want to dwell on, and that continues. These COVID reading and purchasing problems or patterns are holding. And also comics are not a category that's historically been hurt by macroeconomic conditions. Not only because it's relatively inexpensive relative to other forms of entertainment, but also because there's the collectible aspect and that escapism quality to it. And at this point, I want to announce that we're going to be doing a special program next year because the Comics Direct Market originated in 1973 when Phil Suling and Johnny Lavas met with Sal Harrison from DC Comics at San Diego Comic-Con. And that fall, they shipped the first shipment to comic stores, which had not previously been able to buy comics except through returnable wholesalers where you couldn't determine what you were buying. That changed the entire business. This show is here because of the Comics Direct Market. All of the shows on TV and on movies are happening because of the Comics Direct Market and the community that grew in comic stores. So over the next year, we're going to be looking at that phenomenon. We're going to look at the history of it. Then we're going to carry it forward, look at where we are now and where it might be going next. So because we started late, I can maybe take one or two questions, and then we're going to hand off to the next speakers. And if you do have a business card, write deck on it, hand it to me. I'll send you this deck so you can spend more time with it. And happy to answer questions by email later as well.
Welcome back to New York Comic Con in person. Really happy to be here. I have been writing and talking about webtoons and this format for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, because I think it's really an exciting development for the medium of comics and the industry of comics. The things that make it interesting to me are that it's bringing in a lot of new voices through alternative channels of becoming professionals and becoming professional storytellers in comics. It's creating some new alliances within the industry, and it's also bringing in lots and lots of money. So keep in mind the numbers that Milton was talking about earlier, where we talk about $2 billion for the entire North American comics industry all up, and think about compare that to some of the things that you'll be hearing from David about the volume of Webtoon business, the trajectory of the Webtoon business, and the kind of viewership and reader numbers that these comics are getting. So first of all, let me introduce David Lee, who is, Milton said, is VP of Content for Webtoon. Can you just tell us a little bit about your role and responsibilities with the company, David?
Sure. Hi. Nice to meet you. Hi, nice to meet everyone. I first want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. I don't think I've ever been given a chance to speak to so many industry professionals like all at once. So thank you for this opportunity. My name is David, and I'm the head of content at US Webtoon, and I lead our content function that is responsible for basically sourcing. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Sourcing, developing, and delivering original series to our platform.
Great, so, you know, a lot of times when I'm talking to people in the business, if they're aware of webtoons, they think this is something that's a little bit external to comics. It's like it's interesting, but the stories are different, the way you read them is different, and of course it's a digital platform, and it's a little bit disconnected from traditional comics retail and comics publishing. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, how the medium became popular first in Asia and then in North America in terms of the growth of it, and where you are right now in terms of revenue, users, those sorts of things, just so people have a sense of the scale of your business?
Sure. I mean, I think I think that our growth in US and Asia looked very different because I think we're in a very different place. But if I speak to how our growth came about in Korea, Korean comic industry, or manhwa industry as you're more familiar with, was not as big as manga industry or American comic industry, and it wasn't doing particularly well, especially in early 2000s. So there wasn't a lot of places for creators to create comics and get paid for it, and I think this was when because this was sort of the early days of internet, there were also a lot of creators, independent creators, who were posting their own independent comics online, and I think there are a couple of platforms, including Naver, sort of, who caught eyes, by these platforms and started to build it, and it was really more of a natural transgression of everyone's reading and everyone's scrolling, and that's sort of the most familiar and accessible form of reading that we're observing online. So, we started creating content that sort of naturally fit people's reading pattern, and I think a lot of growth really came from when mobile devices, when iPhone and Android became sort of became part of our everyday life, and that's when, because there were already a lot of creators who are creating content in this format, that's when things really blew up. And I think later on, as online business has grown, we also saw that we started to see a lot of popular webtoon get readapted into graphic novels in Korea, and sort of creating this virtuous circle in the industry. I think in the US, our growth was very different, because I think there was already a much bigger comic industry that was in existence. I think goal really was the same in, growing the online space first. And if we sort of go back to this year marks the 8th year of when we first started in the US. And I like to sort of look at our first decade in the US and break it down into 4 quarters. I think our first 3 years, we're very focused on cultivating online creators and making sure, there's a platform and a place that they could go on to. The second quarter was sort of when we focused a lot on user growth, and that's when we tried to, we made a lot of investments sort of in promoting on different larger online platforms to grow the audience. So there is an instant destination for a lot of online comic readers. And this was when we discovered that, hey, there are a lot of readers who are discovering the medium of comics through Webtoon, and these were a lot of young people who perhaps haven't been familiarized with the comics in more traditional format. And our third quarter was when we started focusing on monetization. And a lot of our monetization focused on, based on the online monetization models that we've implemented in Korea and Japan and other places, and we're able to successfully sort of install this. In our final quarter, we're looking, sort of seeing it as more into introducing Webtoon to more larger part of the industry, and this is where now we've started printing graphic novel versions of Webtoon, and we're starting to adapt Webtoon into different media format, and so that there is more of Webtoon's presence in offline. And we hope, I guess for the purpose of this meeting, I think we're all sort of in the same storytelling comics business, and we hope more popular Webtoons and more popular creators can also bring fresh faces to comic stores as well.
Now, when we talk about Webtoon as a global platform, so the global readership that you're reaching in Asia, in the US, in the other markets that you're going to, can you quantify maybe the size of your market by revenue, how many active users, things like that, so people get a sense of exactly how large an enterprise we're talking about here?
Right. On a global, so Webtoon is currently being published in 10 different languages, and all across the world we have about 89 million monthly active users. And last year, our gross merchandise volume of sales was around $900 million US, and that's just coming from online sales, and it purely based on sort of what we call paid content or paid access.
So once again, $900 million US global revenue. What Milton was just saying is the entire North American comics business, all up, digital print, graphics novel, trade, is about $2 billion. So roughly half of that. So how important...
Oh, sorry, and also just to clarify, that's just sort of looking at our company number. I think if we include all of Webtoon companies and combine it, I don't think we don't actually... there are similar organizations like ICv2, but because it's a newer format, I don't think I have access to like more instant accurate number. But when we combine all the companies, it's well over $1 billion.